Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. 37 of Canto 1, Chapter 15. It's not written on the board, so I'll just chant it in that case. Parisarpanang Buddha Pure Charashtre Chagrihe Tatatmani Vibhavya Lokhanrita Jihma Hingsanadya Dharma Chakrang Gamanaya Paryadhat. Read the translation again. Maharaj Yudhishthira was intelligent enough to understand the influence of the age of Kali, characterized by increasing avarice, falsehood, cheating and violence throughout the capital, state, home and among individuals. So he wisely prepared himself to leave home and he dressed accordingly. Purport. The present age is influenced by the specific qualities of Kali. Since the days of the battle of Kurukshetra about 5,000 years ago, the influence of the age of Kali began manifesting, and from authentic scriptures it is learned that the age of Kali is still to run on for 427,000 years. The symptoms of the Kali Yuga as mentioned above, namely avarice, falsehood, diplomacy, cheating, nepotism, violence and all such things are already in vogue, and no one can imagine what is going to happen gradually with further increase of the influence of Kali till the day of annihilation. We have already come to know that the influence of the age of Kali is meant for godless, so-called civilized men. Those who are under the protection of the Lord have nothing to fear from this horrible age. Maharaj Yudhishthira was a great devotee of the Lord, and there was no necessity of his being afraid of the age of Kali. But he preferred to retire from active household life and prepare himself to go back home, back to Godhead. The Pandavas are eternal companions of the Lord, and therefore they are more interested in the company of the Lord than anything else. Besides that, being an ideal king, Maharaj Yudhishthira wanted to retire just to set an example for others. As soon as there is some young fellow to look after the household affairs, one should at once retire from family life to uplift oneself to spiritual realization. One should not rot in the dark well of household life till one is dragged out by the will of Yamaraj. Modern politicians should take lessons from Maharaj Yudhishthira about voluntary retirement from active life and should make room for the younger generation. Also, retired old gentlemen should take lessons from him and leave home for spiritual realization before forcefully dragged away to meet death. Many important points here in the verse and purport. We shouldn't expect anything less from the Srimad Bhagavatam, the topmost contribution of Srila Vyasadeva, and in the estimation of Narad Muni, the only contribution of any real value. And that presented to us by Srila Prabhupada after studying the commentaries of all the Acaryas. Srila Prabhupada's commentary is specifically pertinent to the condition of modern man. More than previous Acaryas, he spoke about the condition of human society and how it can be rectified by Krishna consciousness. Previous Acaryas, in their commentaries and in their ministration, they mostly didn't concern themselves with social matters. The Gauriya Sampradaya was, at least from the external perspective, was founded in a time of Muslim rule. I say from the external perspective because ultimately it should be understood to be eternal. It's not a historical phenomenon. But Chaitanya Mahaprabhu appeared in a time of Muslim rule, and that influenced the development of the Gauriya Sampradaya, especially in Vrindavan, where almost all the deities that were established by the Goswamis, the original Goswami followers of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, during the tolerant reign of Akbar, well, later they were taken out of Vrindavan due to the atrocities of Aurangzeb. And then later on, the Muslim rule was gradually replaced throughout India by rule of the Europeans, which became eventually almost all of India was ruled by the British. So the Gauriya Vaishnavas, they went on with their activities and preaching, but they didn't much concern themselves with social matters or trying to change the direction of political affairs. They just within, as much as they could, they would be happy if they were not disturbed by the Muslim rulers. They went on with their activities, and they discussed Gaura Tattva, Gaura Leela, Krishna Tattva, Krishna Leela, all these subject matters. Bhakti Tattva, how to advance in devotional service. The supremacy of Shuddha Bhakti over Karma, Jnana and Yoga, Karma Mishra Bhakti, Jnana Mishra Bhakti, Yoga Mishra Bhakti. These were their subject matters. The first Gauriya Acharya to take any, at least as far as I'm aware, to take any political stance of any sort was that of Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur, who was a government servant in the time of British rule, at a time when opposition to British rule was increasing throughout Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur's manifest presence. That increased. But Bhaktivinoda Thakur, unlike most people of the same social background in Bengal, he took a stance of supporting the British Crown. He didn't join with most of his national compatriots in opposing it. And his outlook was that if they don't disturb us, if we can do our activities without disturbance, then why should we be against them? This stance was continued by Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur, that he didn't oppose the British, rather he actually came out openly supporting them. At the time of George V, his silver jubilee, I'm not sure, it must have been 25 years of his reign, then in the Nadia Prakash, which was the daily newspaper of the Gauriya Math, produced a special edition lauding George V, who's got nothing to do with Krishna consciousness. And they had at the Bhaktivinoda Thakur school, in Mayapur, they had all the children, they had a special service for the prayers for the well-being of the king and the queen. And Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur would send his preachers to meet important people in the British Raj administration. And he himself met with Governor of Bengal and various other dignitaries. The Governor of Bengal came to Mayapur. And the message was that in traditional Indian society, the rulers govern and they take advice from the Brahmanas. And the Brahmanas, they give blessings. In this way, the combination goes on and human society is regulated. So, Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur, he was advising like that you take advice from us. We appreciate the help that the government was, they reciprocated. They gave permission for a printing press, which wasn't common in those days, because a printing press can be used for making propaganda against the government. And in closed societies up to the present date, the press is very tightly controlled. And you'll see, just like if you go to the capital of Bangladesh, you'll find the Bangladesh Broadcasting Corporation, whatever it is, the national TV station, it's always guarded by soldiers. Because that's the first thing that, if there's a military coup, one of the first things they want to do is take over the media, the mass media, so that they can influence the people. So they gave permission for a printing press. They, when rowdies wanted to disturb the Gauriya Math different celebrations, they sent in extra deployment of police. So there was a mutual cooperation. And another way in which Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur and Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur, they addressed the social situation, was again unconventional and therefore controversial, was the granting of mantra diksha they themselves would give it, and including giving the sacred thread, and they would give it to persons of all castes on the basis of their being Vaishnavas. As Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur explained, there are two kinds of Brahmins. One can be called a conventional Brahmana, Sadharan Brahmana, or, no, what's the word he used? Vyavaharik. That means for practical purposes. Someone who's born in a Brahmin family, he can perform sacrifices for people and puja and be a panda in a holy place and perform different samskars and all this. Well, actually they didn't want the samskars performed by conventional Brahmanas. So they may be respected as conventional Brahmanas, but the real Brahmana is the paramarthik Brahmana, spiritual Brahmana, on the basis of his knowing what is Brahman, what is the Supreme Absolute Truth. Param Brahma, Param Dhamma, Pavitram Paramam Bhava. As Arjuna told Krishna that you, Krishna, you are the Supreme Brahman, you are the Supreme Dham, or resting place of everything, or abode. You are the Supreme Pure. So, this kind of Brahmana is superior. Brahma Janati, what is that? Brahma Janati? No, there's other, I'm thinking of another, yeah, that's correct. Yeah, Brahma Janati Eti Brahmana. There's another one, which I think, Upanishadic quote, which just isn't coming to my mind just now. No, it's that one becomes Brahma by knowing Brahma. By knowing the Shastra, one becomes... that's it. Brahmavit, Brahma Bhavat. Brahmaiva Bhavati. So, they introduced this. Bhaktivinoda Thakur first, well, he wasn't even the first. It wasn't a new thing. Narottam Das Thakur done it. It was regularly being done in the Shyamananda Sampradaya. But especially when Bhaktivinoda Thakur started, actually was being introduced by Bhaktivinoda Thakur. That's why that big discussion came up in Medinipur district, as a result of which the book was eventually published, Brahmana O Vaishnava. Vishayak, Brahmana O Vaishnava, Vishaya Taratamya, the consideration of the gradation and the subject of Brahmanas and Vaishnavas. So that book was, that meeting was in the presence of Bhaktivinoda Thakur. So it wasn't that Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur first introduced this, but he did so on a wide scale, and he strongly established that everyone who is a Vaishnava should be known as a Brahmana and more than a Brahmana, which upset the ruling clique, you could say, of the Hindu society. But even that, Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur, he wrote in one letter that actually I didn't introduce this specifically to disturb the broader society, nor was my effort in inducting Vaishnavas as officially as Brahmanas meant to, I'm not trying to reform the whole of society, but I'm just trying to create an atmosphere in which the Vaishnavas, they can operate. Saraswati Thakur, he wrote in one letter that actually I didn't introduce this specifically to disturb the broader society, nor was my effort in inducting Vaishnavas as officially as Brahmanas meant to, I'm not trying to reform the whole of society, but I'm just trying to create an atmosphere in which the Vaishnavas, they can operate. He said, my reforms are specifically meant for Vaishnava society. But our own Srila Prabhupada took that further. And he wanted to, that Bhaktivinoda Thakur had ordered Siddhanta Saraswati that one of his instructions was to establish Varnashram Dharma. But Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur went this far to induct persons as Brahmanas on the strength of their dedication to Lord Vishnu. Our own Srila Prabhupada took that further, saying that the whole of, well, in the Western world there is nothing even resembling Varnashram society, apart from well, there is, as Srila Prabhupada pointed out, there is anyway in every society different classes of people, even without specifically designating some people as Brahmanas, some as Kshatriyas, some as Vaishyas, and some as Shudras. Then certain people, they naturally, by their propensities, they gravitate towards certain kinds of occupations. Some people are naturally inclined towards worship, study, teaching. Others have natural leadership qualities. Others are natural, and they naturally have a tendency to want to make money, and they tend to be good at it. They're very interested in that. And others, they don't have any of these qualities, but they naturally feel satisfied if they're serving someone. They don't like to take the risk. Even in modern society, some people, they won't take the risk of starting a business, or they'll be happy. Okay, I do my work, I get paid, and okay. So they're naturally more like Shudras. But there's no, as Srila Prabhupada said, there's no scientific organization. Nor is there any idea of the goal of life. Varnashram society, without understanding the goal of life, without having genuine Brahmanas to lead it, it becomes asuric Varnashram. Then it becomes, there may be Brahmanas, but they simply, so-called Brahmanas, but they accept the privileges of the Brahmana class without doing their duty of teaching what is the goal of life, or setting a proper example of that. So Srila Prabhupada wanted to, seeing the chaos in society. that arises from not understanding the goal of life. He wanted to introduce Varnashram, beginning with Brahmanas. The head of society is required. That's a very ambitious project, isn't it? If we consider what it means to establish Varnashram. We've heard it said that Srila Prabhupada said 50% of my work is not done because I didn't establish this. If you consider what Prabhupada did, which was unimaginable and impossible for anyone else to do, then if you say that again such a big and such a major work is still required, the establishment of Varnashram, then we can understand it's a very great job. But we can also, having seen the years go by without Varnashram being established, even within devotee society, we can see the effects of that, which are not very salutary. That devotees, without having the Varnashram structure to fall back on, then Varnashram organization the organization of any society is based around its economic basis. The culture is very much influenced by the economic basis. So Varnashram society, the economic basis is cow protection, Krishi Goraksha, with some Vanija, cow agriculture and cow protection, with some trading. But as Srila Prabhupada explained, that doesn't, the business activities that Vaishyas undertake, they're not this producing rubber ducks and for people to play with in their bath and big toys for overgrown children, like fancy cars, and not factory civilization, but more or less everything is produced locally in any traditional society, but some things they're not. And then traders, they will bring, just like produce in Bengal. The ladies, they have this shaka. You have? Who can? Samvit. This Mataji you have. This white bangle you have? You don't know what it is? It's the same thing as the conch we blow. Comes from the sea. So you can't produce that locally. That's just one example. There's so many things. Salt, which is a necessity in every household, that's in most places not produced locally. Unless there's a salt mine or you're close to the sea, then that won't be produced locally. So some things, it's required that traders, they go around, or people in villages, every so often they go to some fair, religious fair, and at the religious fair, the fair should be religious, because the whole, in Indian culture, everything's religious. So at that time they also take the opportunity the traders come and they offer these things and for sale. And in a very small hamlet there won't be a permanent blacksmith, so they may have to go to a small town you don't need to buy metal items very often, but occasionally you may need to. Some pot gets worn out, so you give it to the smith and he remakes it. He may have to add some, like this. So, Krishigo Raksha Vanija, this agriculture, cow protection, and trading, this is the economic basis of Varnashram society. Srila Prabhupada would quote this, Gavaya Dhanavan, then Dhanya Dhanavan. One who has got cows and grains is considered wealthy. These are the basic necessities. You can have wads of dollars, but it won't help when there's any emergency situation. If there's no food, then you could maybe eat the paper dollars. It might give some kind of nourishment, but it's not very helpful. And even gold, in a time of crisis, even gold won't help you. So to have cows and grains. That is the most basic necessity. These are also required for yajna. Varnashram society is based around yajna. And yajna, the fire sacrifice, requires grains and ghee. And for the bigger yajnas, the public yajnas, apart from the daily yajnas which brahmanas perform at home, the bigger yajnas, the big public ones that the kshatriya, the kings, they organize, then many people have to be invited. So you need lots of grains and lots of ghee. So this is the economic basis of Varnashram society. And we find that the culture is profoundly influenced, the culture of any society is profoundly influenced by its economic basis. Of course, there may be other theories that the economic basis follows the culture. But at least practically in our ISKCON, we see that to a large extent, the culture is influenced by the economic basis. That devotees who are supposed to spend a lot of time cultivating bhakti, by force of circumstances, many, if not most of them, have very little time for bhakti and spend most of their time working in a factory or an office or driving a truck or something like this, just to get the basic necessities of life. And the basic necessities of modern life are much more than those in traditional society. They're artificial necessities, but in modern society, nevertheless, they are necessities. If you don't have a car in most of America, especially in California, it's very difficult. In New York City, you may not need it, but in most of America, if you don't have a car, it's very difficult to do anything, because everything's so spread. The society is based around car travel. And a car costs a lot of money. And gasoline costs a lot of money. And you have to work to earn it. And there are so many things. In traditional society, your toothbrush is a twig. But nowadays, even if you want to do that, you may be arrested for breaking a twig from the tree. If you can even find a tree of a suitable type. So you have to have a plastic toothbrush, and then some toothpaste, and the list goes on and on and on. You have to have a house with locks on it. You might be surprised to know that in traditional society, most houses didn't have locks, and people would go out. I've seen myself in Ireland in the 1970s that you can go in a village and you go in and you knock and you want to find directions. There's no one at home. The door's wide open. They're not afraid of thieves, because only local people mostly come to the village, and even outside people, they're not. People that stealing was just not known. Now it's changed, because Ireland's become a progressive nation. It's become economically developed. I was in New Zealand in the late 1980s, and they still had the system in the capital city. I'm sure it's changed now. Of the newspapers, there's just a stall with the newspapers. You take it and you put the money. That's all. People were so honest. Been to New Zealand recently? I don't think they have that anymore. But there's so many you didn't need. There's so many security guards and police because people's character have gone down. Last night, the police came knocking on the door where I was staying just opposite at 1:10 in the morning, looking for Frank someone or other. I don't know who it is, but I guess that's got nothing to do with what we're discussing. But there's so many. I heard that in India there's like almost 1 million people engaged in either the police or in security forces, and the Army, Navy and Air Force is over 1 million. That's a lot of the population, even though it's more than 1 billion population. It's a lot of people, because you can't trust anyone. And so there are so many artificial necessities, and devotees, without taking to the simple living, it actually becomes very difficult to cultivate bhakti, because not only is one's time taken away by having to earn a living in the modern context, having to work so hard to produce so many things which are not really needed for humans but are needed in the modern society, then apart from all that work, one also becomes influenced by association. One becomes influenced by the values of modern society. We become influenced by whoever we associate. Sangat sanjayate kamaha. Desire arises from association. So if we're not always associating with Shravanam Kirtanam Vishnu, hearing and chanting about Krishna, then the Shravanam Kirtanam Avishnu, that will go on, discussing about topics other than Vishnu, and associating with people who think they value wearing the latest fashions, and so on. They'll talk about the election upcoming, who's the best politician, and by association one becomes sucked into all this. And the whole society is set up on a very wrong basis, as Srila Prabhupada often pointed out. Of course, this is one of my, you could say, pet peeves, but I'll take the opportunity to air it again. That Srila Prabhupada, he often spoke about the artificial position of women being independent, and he said this is, in modern society, this has produced a puffed up attitude among women. So that was part of the broader Varnashram principles that Srila Prabhupada wanted to institute. Part, it's not the whole of Varnashram, but the role of women Srila Prabhupada saw as being very important, as Arjuna saw it was very important, that Strishu Dushtashu Varshnaya Jayate Varna Sankaraha. If women if they're not in their natural role, then they'll become dushta, then they'll become misbehaved, and the result will be unwanted children. So Arjuna was very afraid of that, but it appears to me that in our modern ISKCON, we're more or less going along with the Western outlook, or the modern society's outlook of gender roles. And even there's some attempt to institute within ISKCON the tolerance or acceptance of homosexuality, which we don't hate homosexuals. Homophobia, the word is the hatred of homosexuals. But at the same time, we can't allow illicit sex of any form, which it can't be allowed that this is acceptable within Vaishnava society. So to allow that there can be active homosex, and that can be given some kind of blessing by the Vaishnava society, is against the principles of Krishna consciousness. But it's perceived by some devotees that there should be some allowance for that, considering the present state of human society. And persons raised in the modern school system, they tend to think that this is all very normal and good, and it's right and proper. So in this way we see that either we're influenced by the modern ways of thinking, or that we find it necessary to compromise or make some allowance or adjustment for that. Allowance and adjustment, that may be there, but if we can institute the kind of society that Srila Prabhupada had in mind, that we read about in his books, then we wouldn't have to make adjustments which in the long run it's going to make it difficult to practice Krishna consciousness. So Srila Prabhupada had this vision of Brahmanas at the head of society. Brahmanas means they should be very learned in Shastra and in understanding the application of that. And that's relatively easy to introduce. But then Kshatriyas. Actually, Varnashram can't go on without Kshatriyas. Because the king has to organize. The whole society has to be organized around sacrifice. The Kshatriyas, they protect the society, they collect taxes, and the bulk of the taxes, or a large part, is used for performing yajnas. And the king, he protects the Brahmanas, and he upholds the principles. So the Brahmana must act as a Brahmana, a Vaishya must act as a Vaishya, Shudra must act as a Shudra. Ramchandra Bhagavan, at least in the Uttar Khanda of Ramayana, it stated that he was told by the Brahmanas that there's one Shudra who's performing austerities for the sake of going to heaven, and this is causing so much disturbance, he should be killed. Ramchandra went and killed him, and often this is thought of as, well, this is very strange, what's wrong with that? And you may think, well, what's wrong if he does austerities? But the point is, he was perceived as being, he was not qualified. A Shudra, his position is paricharya, service to others. By doing that, he can go to heaven, not imitating the position of a Brahmana. Now, if he was a Vaishnava and performing activities to serve the Supreme Lord, that would be acceptable. But to attempt to go to heaven by for some material gain, he wanted to go to Swargaloka by performing austerity. So it upset the natural order of society to such an extent that there were natural disturbances in society. So the king has to understand all these principles. The Kshatriyas, they may or may not be schooled in the subtleties of spiritual knowledge. That is specifically for the Brahmanas. But they have to understand the principles of Dharma so well that when a complaint or a case, a dispute is brought to them, they can immediately, with the help of the Brahmanas, decide what to do and administer justice. It's not that there's a court case which drags on for 20 years, and then you bring one lawyer and then you bring another lawyer and so much money is spent. Instant justice. He has to be able to decide. The Brahmanas, and Kshatriyas, they have to know the principles of Dharma so well. So, establishing Kshatriyas, Srila Prabhupada said that if the Brahmanas, if the Vaishnavas, they preach widely enough, then in a democratic society you can elect a Krishna-conscious president. That was actually Prabhupada's aim, which may seem amazing to us as we sit in this opulent palace, which is there's hardly a few people willing to live in it nowadays. It seems that the Krishna-conscious movement is in decline in some ways, but Srila Prabhupada's his vision was for a Krishna-conscious society ruled by Kshatriyas. Now, how much training goes into making a Brahmana and a Kshatriya? We can hardly imagine. In ISKCON we think there was they get initiated and a few months later they get Brahmana initiated. Nowadays there's a stipulation. It's not actually a stipulation, I don't think, but it's often accepted that they should also be they should have a Bhakti Shastra examination. I believe that was Prabhupada's requirement also, wasn't it? You could say that, Bhakti Shastri. They should have passed that. But how much training went previously into making Brahmanas? It's from very childhood, all the points of etiquette and behavior, just like I think I embarrassed someone yesterday by telling him not to put his hand on his mouth, and telling that actually that should be taught by the mother. from the age of 1. Actually, practically from the beginning of life. I've seen, even up to the present day, I've seen Bengali village women who don't really know anything about Shastra, and most of them they don't even read, but they'll pull the child's hand out of his mouth like every 20 seconds or so until he gets the idea not to put it in, and they're continuously pulling it out, because if you put your hand in or on your mouth, then you have to touch everything, you contaminate it, and you put your hand on the Shastra. So this may seem like a small point, but it's important for Brahmanas. Brahmanas have to be clean. Srila Prabhupada noted in a purport in Sri Chaitanya Charitamrita that it's a very important point that those who are engaged in worshipping the deity don't touch outside people. Because for chanting Hare Krishna, you can do it in any state. It's a common thing even up to the present day, and Srila Prabhupada himself did it daily, that without taking bath he'd chant on his japa beads. But for worshipping the deity, you can't do that. There are so many more rules, that one has to be Brahmin initiated, and one has to be clean. Srila Prabhupada often emphasizes cleanliness is important, and that's a major quality of Brahmanas. And cleanliness, what is considered to be clean in Western countries, they have no idea, naturally. As Prabhupada, one of his first letters from America to India, he was writing back and saying that the people here, they're so uncultured that after passing stool, they just use paper to wipe their backside. You smear the stool around on your backside, and then you pull your pants up and go on with life. You don't take a bath or any such thing. So that was quite shocking. Definitely you can't do that if you've got to worship the deities, or even be considered a human being, a civilized human being. What to speak of a Brahmana? So the standards are actually very, very high. What Srila Prabhupada had in mind for a Brahmana was not simply the paramarthik Brahmana, that because he's worshipping Vishnu, he should be recognized as even better than a Brahmana, even if he's not Shatkarma Nipano Vipra Mantra Tantra Visharadaha, even if one is not expert in all the Brahminical duties, if he is a Vaishnava, he should be considered a guru of everyone, even if he doesn't know how to chant Sanskrit, this, that and the other, because he's a Vaishnava, because being a Brahmana is only a partial, it's only a pre-qualification for being a Vaishnava. So even if one is not formally qualified as a Brahmana, if he's a Vaishnava, then the quality of a Brahmana is included in that. But Srila Prabhupada wanted to take that further and to make Brahmanas who are actually fit to guide society on the basis of Shastra, and Kshatriyas, and establish the whole Varnashram society as an antidote to the Kali Yuga, where this present society, it's very difficult to be Krishna conscious in the present society. And we see that, like I was saying, so many devotees have fallen away. There may be various reasons for that. One of them is just the force of the Kali Yuga. It's the economic necessity of having to get a job and so forth, and just unless we're inoculated by quality hearing and chanting, and by associating with devotees, then the tendency is to be pulled down. Just the waves of Kali Yuga are very difficult to go against, to withstand. So that was one of Srila Prabhupada. You can see 50% of my work is not done. That was one of his major aims, which I just touched on today. It's a big subject. I'm not going to speak much more now. Just making a few points there for everyone's consideration. And if there are any questions, I could take them now. Questions, comments, or whatever. Yeah, please.
In the purport, I can't quote it verbatim, but I was saying the devotee should not be afraid of Kali Yuga.
Yeah, I'll read that. That was, as I said, there are many important points in the purport. I didn't get around to discuss that. Those who are under the protection of the Lord have nothing to fear from this horrible age. Maharaj Yudhishthira was a great devotee of the Lord, and there was no necessity of his being afraid of the age of Kali. Yeah, so if we're under the protection of the Lord, we have no... Under the protection of the Lord means that Mahatmanas tumang parta daiving prakriti ashritaha, taking shelter of the spiritual energy. That means by being fully engaged in Krishna's service. It's not that. See, often it seems to me that devotees say, well, a devotee is on the transcendental platform, and they just say, oh, okay, I'm on the transcendental platform. So I'm a devotee, I'm on the transcendental platform, but we have to understand contextually that in this case, devotee, when Prabhupada says a devotee is on the transcendental platform, it means one who's really a pure devotee, because those who are not, it's like, it's, how do you say, it's like an axiom, or that one who's not on the one who's not fully pure is not on the transcendental platform. And although here Srila Prabhupada states that a devotee is not afraid of Kali Yuga, on the other hand, it is healthy to be afraid of Maya. I'm not afraid of Maya, so I can go anywhere and do anything, but it's healthy for a devotee to have fear that I can fall down. Srila Prabhupada, he said that I pray every night to Krishna, I will not fall down. Isn't that amazing? Where's the question of Prabhupada falling down? But in this material ocean, it's very dangerous. And a devotee, he never thinks, I'm a pure devotee. So he prays to Krishna to protect me. Srila Prabhupada also said, whenever I go in a rich man's house, I pray to Krishna, that Krishna protect me, that I not be tempted to this. That's his humility and his teaching us how we should pray. Instead of thinking, oh, this is very nice, I could enjoy this. I could be like this. Pray to Krishna not to be tempted. There's another question? Any question? Yeah, yes, sir.
I just walked in and I didn't know if it had been mentioned, but sometimes Srila Prabhupada will mention that sannyasa is obligatory. And sometimes I've heard him also give instruction that the sannyasa order for men was not obligatory.
Yeah.
Can you explain it?
Sometimes Prabhupada stated sannyasa is obligatory, and other times he said it's not necessary. So it appears to be a contradiction. Well, what does sannyas mean? Sannyas is generally understood as panchasardvang vanang vrajit. After over the age of 50, one should go to the forest. Of course, one can also go to the forest with his wife and be a vanaprastha. There's also the spirit of sannyas. It's described in the first verse of the 6th chapter of Bhagavad-gita. Can you say? Shri Bhagavan Uvacha, you know the 6th chapter? Anashrita karma phalang karyam karma karoti yaha sasanyasi cha yogi cha naniragnena chakriyaha. One who formally takes sannyas by giving up connection with fire. Householder, in the home there has to be a fire burning through generations, akhanda deep, that's used when you don't have matches or these lighters, or if none of them work, as seems to be here most of the time, then it's good to have what do you do if there's no matches or lighter? How are you going to have a fire? It's not so easy to make a fire. So you have to have the fire burning all the time, especially when it's needed for lighting and for cooking. And for yajnas, you have to have so fire is kept burning in the householder's home. So one of the symptoms of a sannyasi, karma sannyas, is that he leaves home, he doesn't have a fire. He doesn't cook. He just accepts whatever food is given to him, and he stops performing the daily sacrifices. So he has no connection with fire. Of course, a Vaishnava sannyasi may cook for Krishna. But karma sannyas means to give up fire. And he gives up the prescribed duties of a householder. Sannyasi also has prescribed duties, but much less than those of a householder. So that is formal acceptance of sannyas. But there is, Lord Krishna explains in this verse from Bhagavad-gita that the real sannyasi is one who, even though he may be in household life, he works according to his duties without being attached. So such a grihastha may also, in the intrinsic sense of the term, be considered a sannyasi. However, the point of renouncing home, Srila Prabhupada did emphasize that, and it seems like it's worth emphasizing in ISKCON at the modern time, because there are many householders who have reached 50 and gone well beyond and who are not renouncing home. Maybe one reason is because, again, without the Varnashram society to log into, or that if you go begging door to door, then you may be shot in America, especially in Texas. I think you're allowed by law. If someone comes on your property, I heard that, you're allowed to shoot him. So, that may be one reason. Although the idea is of sannyas in any society is to take shelter of Krishna. That Krishna will protect me. So one can do that with wife also. One can also leave. But the point is to leave family life, because the tendency is that one will be attached. And at the time of death, when you should be thinking of Krishna, if you're thinking of your wife or your children or your home, then you have to come back. So that's the whole purpose of of taking up this way of life is to get free from this material world and go to Krishna. But that's all tested at the time of death. So even though it's difficult, it's required to do so. Otherwise, the tendency to think of one's wife and home is more. So there's some thoughts on that. Every question could be answered with a book, actually, because these topics are so profound. But we have to. Prabhupada was expert in answering, just capturing the essence, and sometimes in a few words he could summarize a whole complex topic.